Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's national webinar presented by SAMHSA's GAIN Center with the support of SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Today's webinar is When Recovery is Work, Promoting Wellness in Peer Support Roles. We have two great presenters today, Dr. Peggy Swarbrick and Mr. Philip Cooper, and I will introduce them in just a couple of minutes. My name is Erica Ihara, and I'm a project associate at SAMHSA's GAIN Center and Policy Research Associates. And you will see that there's a chat box at the bottom of your screen. And if you'd like, please use the chat box to introduce yourselves and share with the group where you're joining us from. Before we start our presentations, I have a couple of housekeeping items to review, so I'm just going to cover those right now. First, our disclaimer: the views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation and discussion do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services, the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So if you have any questions for the presenters, we do have time saved at the end to cover as many of your questions as we can in the time remaining. So please use the Q&A pod for that. And we'll be queuing up your questions. And at the conclusion of the presentations, we will address as many of your questions as time permits. We will also be conducting a couple of polls throughout today, and we really appreciate your participation in the polls. So you should have just seen one pop up on your screen, and if you'd like to participate, we'll be sharing some of that information in just a few minutes. So this webinar is being recorded, and the slides will be disseminated to everyone registered for today via the GAINS listserv following the event. And we will also be notifying all registrants when the recording is posted to SAMHSA's YouTube channel. And we also have a certificate of attendance available for download at the end of the event today. And just a reminder to everyone that this is we're not able to offer CEU credits for today. So this is just a certificate to confirm that you were here, and it's for your personal portfolio use only. We have American Sign Language interpretation for this event, and we have two interpreters for today, and their names are Kip Opperman, who's with us right now, and Paige Bixby. And we also have live captioning for today's event. So if you'd like to view the live captioning, click Live Transcript CC and then select Show Subtitles. So just a quick look at today's agenda. Coming up next, Roxanne Castañeda will be providing some opening remarks on behalf of SAMHSA, and then she will be followed by two presentations. And then we'll have some time at the end to address questions from you and the audience. And so now I'd like to turn this over to Roxanne Castañeda. She is Public Health Advisor at the Center for Mental Health Services at SAMHSA for her opening remarks. Roxanne.
Thank you, Erica. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the webinar. SAMHSA would like to start by thanking our SAMHSA GAINS partners, Erica Ihara and Ashley Sabatino, for their dedication and work on this project. SAMHSA remains committed to peer workers. As discussed on our website, peer support workers are people who have been successful in the recovery process, who help others experiencing similar situations through shared understanding, respect, and mutual empowerment. Peer support workers help people become and stay engaged in the recovery process and reduce the likelihood of relapse. Peer support services can effectively extend the reach of treatment beyond the clinical setting into the everyday environment of those seeking a successful, sustained recovery process. But what about the support and wellness for the peer worker? There is not a lot written about this topic. As discussed by the SAMHSA GAINS Center planning team for this webinar, peers provide a critical level of support for individuals throughout all the intercepts of the criminal justice system. But often, the supportive nature of their role causes them to prioritize the needs of others over themselves. When a peer neglects their own needs to support the needs of others, they become more likely to experience negative consequences such as burnout and compassion fatigue. This is especially true for peers working with individuals who are involved with the criminal justice system. Whether a peer is serving as a mentor, assisting individuals with navigating the criminal justice system, advocating for those in recovery, or providing linkages to supports and services, it is crucial that peers not lose sight of their own wellness and job satisfaction. It is our hope that at the conclusion of the webinar, participants should be able to understand the increased risk of burnout and compassion fatigue amongst individuals in peer support roles, describe strategies that peer support staff can use to bolster their self-care and personal wellness, recognize the opportunities at an organizational level that may help support wellness amongst peer support staff. In Mental Health America's 31 Ways to Work on Wellness, number 20 is a quote from Henry David Thoreau. "What lies before us and what lies behind us are small matters compared to what lies within us. And when you bring what is within out into the world, miracles can happen." Please join us in welcoming our experts on promoting wellness in peer support roles, Dr. Peggy Swarbrick and Philip Cooper. Erica?
Thank you so much, Roxanne. So now I would like to take a couple of minutes to introduce our two distinguished speakers. Dr. Peggy Swarbrick is Director of Collaborative Support Programs of New Jersey Wellness Institute, as well as Research Professor and Associate Director of the Center of Alcohol and Substance Use Studies at Rutgers University in New Jersey. Many of you in the audience are likely already familiar with much of Dr. Swarbrick's numerous contributions to the field, including many collaborative projects with the peer and recovery communities, and also the 8 Dimensions of Wellness model, which she developed, which is a strength-based model to promote recovery. Next slide, please. Mr. Philip Cooper is the Executive Director of Operation Gateway, located in Asheville, North Carolina. He is the founder of Voices of Affrilachiae, which is a state-funded initiative to address stigma around mental health issues in the Black communities of Western North Carolina. And his work and leadership as a reentry expert and an advocate is recognized by way of the multiple fellowship positions and board appointments that he holds. And he is the recipient of the Martin Luther King Jr. Association of Asheville Service Award. And I'd like to take just a minute to take a look at your the poll results. And so thank you to everyone who responded. So it looks like most of you, almost half today, are joining from urban areas, followed by about 30% from rural areas and around 22% from suburban areas. Just about 1% of you live on tribal lands, and many types of organizations and agencies represented today. Community-based providers, corrections, probation, parole, crisis services, government, academia and research, the hospitals, judiciary, law enforcement, public health, and other. So thank you all for joining, and we're really looking forward to hearing your comments and questions at the end of today's presentations. And so with that, I am going to turn this over to Dr. Swarbrick to get us started. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. Just really exciting to come to this kind of a space to really talk about this topic that's so important, thinking about the self-care and the wellness of peer support of the workforce in general, but of peer supporters in doing the really important work that so many of you probably are doing here. And it's just so good to see the different people from all over. So welcome. So really what I would like to do in this presentation right now is just kind of, I'm going to go back to a little bit about the risk that, Roxanne mentioned, the risks that happen, the great work that we do. There's so many positives, but what puts us at risk? and also kind of look at that a little bit, but then really move into strategies. And what I like to hopefully you walk away from this piece of my presentation, and also what Philip's going to talk about too, is just with strategies, what you can do, what's available. So that's really what my piece here is. So when we think about, you know, the compassion fatigue, this term, I'm going to talk a little about it in a minute, but was mentioned the risks, the burnout, the risk of burnout for so many of us working in this important work. It's just such a risk that sometimes we don't pay attention to. And one of the things I like to help think about is not to run away from the field, a lot of people leaving and stuff, and that's personal decisions, but becoming aware of that we are at risk, because so much of a skill we use is the compassion and the empathy, and so many of the core competencies when you look at peer support roles relates to this risk. So being aware of that, and then being able to think about what we can do, because there's so much we can do. So taking a look at compassion and compassion fatigue, which is talked a lot, you know, so compassion is like really at the heart and soul of the interaction in a peer support. You know, it's that kindness we have towards someone. It's that caring that can really be such a strength. But sometimes what happens, as many of us probably here know, is that it also can have another effect to really start to wear us out a little bit, especially if we're not paying attention to some of the things we're going to talk about, of taking care of ourselves, putting that oxygen mask on ourselves, so to speak. That kindness, that caring, that empathy that we use, that we work in our day-to-day work, can for some people relating to anxiety, often for some people can lead to depression. And then when we have anxiety and depression, or that, you know, we're starting to get worn out, it can really compromise, again, our own self-care, which I'll highlight, but it also can be influencing that impact of our relationships with our colleagues. So we want to be thinking about that in our work, that risk that we have of it, the risk that we have. And when we think about the trauma that so many people that we're dealing with, because again, we may have our own experiences of trauma, but other people we're dealing with so many times, especially when people are dealing with perhaps criminal justice involvement, substance use, mental health, or sometimes the combination. And then so many of the impacts of social determinants of health, people's under and unemployment, much of the stigma and discrimination. People are dealing with so much of that. And often there's so much trauma that they're either previously experienced or currently experienced. And this can really affect us in our way. And we hear the term about, you know, there's the vicarious trauma. We're seeing it, we're hearing it, we're observing it. And often it can affect us, you know, being able to provide that kindness, to provide that caring, to provide that support. The trauma sometimes that we're experiencing in the work, it, you know, kind of compounds this risk that we're talking about. Related to that is the current concept of, you know, stress. There's good stress and bad stress. We know, you know, there's the good stress that gets us going, but then there's the stress that often influences us in that way that sometimes can wear us out and have a physical, emotional, spiritual impact. So stress is the situations, people, things that can be those stressors in our work. So stressors can be positive or negative. And one of the things we want to be thinking about in terms of our managing of this stress that often is associated with this work that often leads to this burnout, or us being, you know, witnessing this trauma, often is just being aware of this for ourselves and being more aware of it, because it's not like we're going to avoid it. It's there, but it's about what we do in the situation. And we all have our own signs and symptoms that occur that we know when we're moving in that direction, or we are overwhelmed or stressed out. And all of us have different ones that affect us. You know, it can cause our irritability. It can affect in our body. Often fatigue is often associated. And there's often this effect in our breathing, our appetite, our heart rate, and sleep. So it's paying attention. When I talk a little bit the wellness, a lot of the strategies that I'm going to highlight are things you can do to pay attention to these signs that may be occurring for you, that kind of move you in that awareness of, oh, wait a minute, I got to be aware of this and do something so I can keep my heart and soul in the work without letting it, take me to that burnout piece. So being aware of the signs and symptoms and being aware of doing something, which I'm going to hide. And the important reason why we should be doing this is because not only we might burn out from the work and we have so much to contribute, but we could also have physical, not only the emotional impacts of the depression or anxiety that could affect us, but there's a physical signs that can affect our body systems and put us at risk of other kind of medical comorbidities. So, and we do see this a lot with people in healthcare in general, and a lot more peer providers. So I kind of looking at the half empty, starting out with the negative in a sense to help move us to why and how we need to think about this concept that I call wellness self-care. And I really think I've been talking about this for decades. I know people probably like, oh, she's been around for a long time. And a lot of times people listen, they liked it a little bit, but never do I ever see the interest in self-care, particularly for healthcare workers and particularly for peer providers. It's really for all, but we really need to be thinking about that self-care. And we need to think about, because we are trained to support, educate, inspire. We want to support people, provide that emotional support, that kindness, caring. We want to educate, inspire. But again, as I mentioned previously, the burnout and the compassion and fatigue are just rampant. And I'm going to highlight later, like even the Surgeon General, I'm going to highlight something in the towards the end, that the Surgeon General is looking at this for healthcare providers and for peer providers particularly. So really, really gives us this focus on self-care, wellness self-care. And here's what the Surgeon General talks about, a call to action. So we're here today to really abide by that call to action of the Surgeon General, to kind of like think about what we can do. I'm going to highlight a little bit about what workplace cultures can do and should do to try to really protect and prioritize taking care of our healthcare workers, particularly peer support providers, but also to prioritize. And one of the things they do in this, and I'm really excited about, is that social connection. And I think that's one of the strengths of peer supporters, helping us to connect more with us and build that social connection, but also invest in it. And there's just, from the top here is saying this, that's reinforcing the importance of this for us. So what can we do for our wellness self-care? So I just suggest that we think about our wellness. Wellness has been around, the wellness wheel that many of you know, wellness being that conscious, deliberate process where I become aware of and I make a choice. Okay, what am I going to do today physically for myself? For me personally, in my journey of life, of working on myself in my recovery, physical wellness and the physical things are the things that have been my self-care staples. So paying attention to them on a regular basis, making that a habit, thinking about intellectually, so it's like environmentally, emotionally, financially, socially, spiritually, occupation, taking an awareness of all of my dimensions of wellness, because when I really often take that time to pause and think about it, I am doing something that can help me in these areas, or I can strengthen something in this area. So we want to really think about wellness from this dimensional model and be thinking about what's our strengths, which dimensions, and I'm going to invite you to do that in a minute. I talk about the definition. It's that we become consciously and we're deliberately, we think about it, what we're doing. And every day you're here, you are all here today. You've done many things to focus on your wellness that have really activated your wellness. So thank you for doing that and being aware of it and keep doing it. So I did right here, just want to highlight, for those of you who might know about wellness, just gives you a little bit of a definition of the different dimensions. And I refer you to this, the 8 dimensions, because it's a really nice model for our work personally as peer support recovery workers, but also to share this and do this, share this work with people we support. And again, the workforce is really adopting this much more regularly. So what we do is wellness self-care. Those are the things we do to meet our physical, spiritual, social, occupational, environmental, whatever needs, but also to manage that stress, manage that strain, So I want to, I'm just kind of, I'd love to hear in the chat, when you think about wellness, self-care, we're going to really want to hear what you do. And one of the things that I invite you to do, if you want to either now or later, we're going to put into the chat a quiz that would give you a little bit of a, take your emotional, your wellness temperature. So in the quiz, you'll be able to take this quiz to be able to think about in the last 30 days, what is something you're doing on a regular basis, physically, spiritually, socially, intellectually, occupationally, go around the different dimensions. And you can do it, you can take it now if you want, or later, but up to you. But as I asked you the question, you could either do it based on the quiz or what you think about. But I just would encourage you to kind of definitely go back to this quiz, because it's a really nice quiz. And also encourage you to look at it, because it really does a nice job of mapping out what you are possibly doing already, or it might give you ideas of areas to strengthen that can really help your in doing the work. So I love now what we do. I love this in the chat. What are you doing? What is it your self-care activities you're doing? Sharing in the chat. We have prayer, meditation, step work, reading, hiking, traveling. Already we have people painting, sharing what they're doing, painting, meditation, yoga. Let's see, hanging out in the pool is, again, excellent for the summertime, walking the dog, crocheting, music, snuggling. Somebody saying they want to work on it. So yeah, definitely go photography, traveling, gratefulness check, fishing, weightlifting, travel, cooking. Oh, we got a group that's really working on their self-care. Excellent. Because I know it's so important. You probably know this, outdoors work. Excellent. Experiencing really being able to be grateful, listening to praise and worship, worship music, traveling, hanging out with my friends. Excellent. Just keep them coming, because one of the greatest things about this wellness, self-care and wellness awareness is over the years, I've been doing this for decades, but when I see what other people are doing, I get an idea. And I have added to my wellness habits many of the ideas that I've heard from colleagues like yourself in sessions like this. So I encourage you to have conversations with one another about what you're doing and sharing. And I want to just thank everybody for what you're putting in the chat, because amazing things that you are doing that are really our self-care activities, and that you are already are doing there. So we might go back to them a little bit more, turn off the ringer for at least an hour a day, but all great ideas. And I want you to be thinking about, many of you are having these. You can also, what I always try to do is try to think about how they're, what am I doing each of the dimensions too, right? When we go back to it, what am I doing physically? What am I doing socially, intellectually? And what you'll notice too is sometimes some of the things that you do, say for example, I just saw a couple of people walking for me is physical, but it's also emotional, and it also sometimes is spiritual for me too. So, the greatest thing is some of your wellness self-care activities can activate 2, 3, 4 of the dimensions. So I kind of see the potency of that activity very strong, because it's helping you with that balance. It's keeping your, it's usually something that's very positive for you. Music's the same way, pulling weeds. I love these ideas. So be aware of what you're doing already, and I am just introducing this tool to you, the inventory, which I've showed you here. And I have a whole bunch of other tools I can share as well. But again, this will just help to remind you what you're doing, but also in groups like you're doing here today, share with each other. And then I'm going to show you a couple of other strategies of where you can actually think about maybe even planning these a little bit more. So thank you so much for all the sharing there. So that's what we do each day. Here's a tool I've created. I'm going to show you tons of tools. I love tools, the first strategies, where you can just kind of now create your plan, because some of us need to write it down, have it in visually. So this is a nice little tool we developed where we were able to put together a little handout, and you can download this one as well. This one is on the website. Most everything I have is downloadable on those websites you'll see. And it kind of just gives you the reminder of what is on my today. Today I'm going to focus. And sometimes we just have to focus on 1 or 2 things. You don't want to get too overwhelmed. It really highlights one of the most important things of the breathing, and a lot of the breathing practice. Many of us do many kind of exercises. I wrote a number of papers on how yoga and mindfulness practices are being used more and more in with healthcare providers, even with peer providers. So just reminding us of that brief. It focuses in on our wellness actions, and then it also goes into the thing about sleep, which I'll highlight. Sleep so important, us to remind ourselves of what time to wake up and to go prepare for sleep, because that really helps you to recharge and keep your body ready for the day and can prevent that burnout, as we highlighted earlier. As well as this tool highlights something that's a really important thing, gratefulness, recording our gratefulness, and then also focusing on something we might do the next day. So again, we'll post this into the chat, this where you get it. It breaks it down into these different sections here. It's a nice tool to kind of remind you of the strategies that you want to do, try, or just keeping those things so fresh in your mind. We'll post the chat, we'll post the link in the chat there in a few minutes there. This is also just built in a nice little summary here. This one, pausing, breathing, nourishment, movement, stretch, doing something just for you. These are just other kind of strategies that many people have identified are so important. And this is another tool you could use just to remind you. So I'm just giving you different variations of different tools. Another tool, so we've kind of talked about the wellness inventory that can prompt your ideas about what are well self-care activities. I've given you the handout on the wellness daily plan. This next tool is a really great resources that I developed by and for people in recovery. We'll put this in the chat too. And this is a tool that we co-developed with people in recovery, and we piloted. And basically, it goes over different simple things that people do for self-care, unplugging, focusing on the wellness in general, the different 8 dimensions there, but then thinking about the daily actions and activities people do, particularly the importance of unplugging, taking that time to unplug, whatever that means for you, to that pausing and unplugging from, could be for a couple seconds, it could be up for a minute, it could be for a longer period of time. You have to decide, but regular unplugging, as many people identified, that was so important for them doing this work. And many of the people that were involved in this were people in recovery who did, were involved in working with people with justice involvement, as well as other substance use and mental health issues. So they're identified for them to get into recovery and stay into recovery, unplugging and doing this work, unplugging. As well as connecting, just making sure during the day there is a way to connect with someone. So that power of connection is highlighted in this book, as well as this book, it's a small book, it's only about 20 pages. And we also have a variation of this booklet that's, it's 1 page back and front. It also highlights the sleep, the essential piece of sleep and doing good. So this is a fantastic, tool that you can easily access. Ashley's been putting these things in the chat. Go up there. We also, the group, we tested it. We pilot tested it with peer providers and case managers, where for 10 up to 12 days, the peer provider or case managers used it themselves. And then for the next 10 to 12 days, they used it with engaging someone in their work. And we got some really good data on this on that pilot. It's the paper about that is at the end of the paper, this session. And they found that they did use it. They looked at it regularly. People found it was helpful. They found it was personally helpful for their work as peer providers, but also it was really a good tool to share with others. And that was very important. So again, this is another tool. We also have on the website there how you could use it with others and in groups. And I just recently worked with some folks, some peer providers in some settings where they've piloted it now in some peer operated recovery and wellness centers in New Jersey. So we have some good results from that. The next tool that I'm going to highlight, it's again strategies, is journaling. And this is another tool that we've actually had it around for decades. Probably the earlier version was around since about 2010, but we just gave it a facelift and refreshed what it looked like, and we added some new content. And it's called Journaling, a Wellness Tool. And it's accessible on this website, and it highlights the benefits of processing, of keeping a journal. It kind of highlights all these different kinds of journaling and then how you can use it. And again, it's another self-care strategy for this work to prevent burnout and to keep yourself motivated and charged for doing the work. So a journal is a way, you know, and it's not only journaling, writing, there's ideas of other kind of creative ways, but journaling helps you really get that inner dialogue. You know, I think that was talking about what Roxanne talked about, that inner self. It gets those thoughts, those feelings out. It helps with creative expression, and it can help you process difficult or challenging life events. And it just helps with that self-awareness and self-understanding. And again, going back to what I highlighted at the beginning, can help you reduce stress. So again, journaling is a tool many people use. This guide that I share with you that we encourage, you know, again, free, downloadable. It talks about what they call stream of consciousness journaling, thought-provoking, illustrative discovery, reflective, and gratitude. So it highlights all the different types and then lets you kind of taste test each of them. Many people find the gratitude one is really popular. And also just recently, I've been working with a colleague. She's been doing this thing called with art, doing journaling with art. So if you're interested in more on journaling, I can even give you more on that. But this tool is a really good tool for you to think about using yourself or sharing with others. So I've highlighted right now personal things you can do for self-care. Next, I'm going to highlight some other things organizationally, perhaps, that could be used, as well as some resources. So as I mentioned, you know, organizational support's important. So those of you who are administrators or administrative roles, you know, it's not just on the peer supporter to go do the yoga or go do their self-care. Sometimes that gets thrown at blaming people to do it themselves and you didn't take care of yourself. There needs to be organizational support for people, promoting people to take care of themselves, access these resources, as well as things you can do. So this is a nice visual I wanted to highlight with what Workforce Places can do, you know, helping to provide, again, today is an opportunity, growth, offering training, education, and mentoring around self-care will be a way that organizations can help prevent that burnout for peer providers. So opportunity for growth, that's highlighted there. Also career pathways, that's one of the things that we find also. I'm not outside of the scope of this, but that's a big piece for peer provider roles, and not having career advancement, as well as getting feedback and making sure there's a feedback work. Again, mattering at work, making sure people have a livable wage. So that's another thing that might be some advocacy that might need to happen to help people with their self-care, to have a living wage, which often, again, there is so much disparity in the work income of the peer support workers that we have to be thinking about. And then engaging workers in decisions, that's going to help enhance their wellness, as well as cultivating that culture of gratitude and recognition. So that's a big piece, as well as connecting people to the organizational mission. There's other pieces here too that I'm not going to go into as much, but there's definitely the one that the work-life harmony relates to the work-life balance that we see, the boundaries. And that's something you have to kind of be mindful, because we get sometimes so overly, really kind of committed to our timing and not setting that time for our own self-care. So helping to work with your supervisors or helping yourself to find that balance between work and non-work time, and using the time you have available, as well as creating those cultures. So just kind of wanted to highlight some components. This is just a whole presentation we could have on this, but there is the organizational leadership, organizational support that's needed for as a strategy. So, and it's about we, right? Creating that culture of we. What I did want to highlight, though, as a resource, the final resource before, not second to last resource before we move to our next part of our presentation, is a resource repository that I've developed. I did a training series over the course of a year just on this topic, and we've cultivated so many great resources on this website here, where you can learn about peer support strategies to really help bolster self-care. There's a lot of individual approaches that couple of the tools that I mentioned are, the one tool I mentioned is on that individual section, the self-care plan, and then organizational approaches. So this would be something I would encourage you to go, as for further resources you're looking personally or you want to share with your organizational leadership, some great resources on this website here that gives you some simple, practical tools that can help you with wellness self-care. And finally, the last tool that I wanted to share is this really cool guide we developed a couple of years ago. It was called A Professional Guide for Caregivers, and it goes over this idea of pausing, breathing, moving, nourishment, and sleep. And you can download this book as well, and there's also on this website here, some practice sessions to teach you about pausing, teaching us about breathing. It goes over, and it's in English and Spanish, and the book is in English and Spanish as well. So that's just another great resource that's available for you as well to really promote as a strategy for wellness self-care. So I hope I didn't, I know sometimes people accuse me of having too much information and sharing too much information in one time. I think that's what I did, but you're going to be able to go back to this, bite off what might be good for you and chew on it a little bit more. And hopefully it's something that kind of digests well, that will help you to really keep your passion for this important work. So I want to thank everybody just kind of for letting me share about my these resources. And if there's other resources, just let me know.
Thank you, Doctor, for an amazing presentation. I was over here trying to monitor the chat a little bit, taking notes. I was getting excited. I was in your amen corner. So I'm glad I was on mute, because just how you broke it down so eloquently, and you could tell you're an OG with doing that work. I know I had actually done a presentation during the pandemic on the social dimensions of wellness back in 2020. And it's crazy to be co-facilitating with the one who created it. Wow, lost dreams awaken. But yeah, today I'm excited, and I've been counting down to this thing because I've been around for a few 24 hours doing this work. I'm blessed to do this work. Anytime recovery is talked about, I love it, because recovery gave me a whole new life. I built from a rock bottom, which was a solid foundation to build off of. And if I wouldn't have been able to be where I am right now, if it had not been for a recovery process, a replicable recovery process, let me say, one that was sent down by way of the predecessors. And so I'm just doing my best to model what was given to me in the way that, I needed to design it for my lifestyle, and many other people who are like me, because it's all about giving back what was so freely given to me. Iron sharpens iron. Iron sharpens iron. First off, before I dive in, I just want to, in a way, qualify myself. I've done professional speaking engagements with different people. I'm starting to get used to flying now. That's still a tough one. But just to qualify myself a little bit, I want to go back in the time. And first, before I even go back in the time, I want everybody to hit the celebrate emoji. Let's hit the celebrate emoji for all of y'all recovery warriors who are kicking the disease of addictions behind, living and enjoying life without the use of any minor mood altering substances, or a new recovery process that you have found that works for you and your family. Man, give yourself a shout out for kicking the disease of addictions behind. But let me go back in the time. I believe there is power in peer support. I'm so passionate about peer support because, see, I was that one young Black man from the streets, used to gang bang, sell dope, and all those things. And I didn't think that anyone could relate to my lifestyle. I didn't think that anyone could relate to the lifestyle I came from. I was looking to disqualify myself, you see, but it was when I went to the penitentiary that I really found the power of peer support. And I was locked up in prison with people who had a lifestyle similar to mine, who had turned it around on the inside. And they was teaching some of the young bucks like myself, they call you young buck. This was before the gray beard, by the way. But they would teach the young bucks how to do time. Somebody in the chat, remember when you first went to prison and you didn't know how to do time? Maybe you was getting in trouble. Maybe you was getting high. Maybe you was in the hole. But see me, I had to learn how to do time. And guess who taught me how to do time? Guess who taught me? People who was doing time. Hence the value of peer support. And so for me, back when I was in prison, I was in a program called A New Direction. It's one that they use in the North Carolina prison system. And it's about criminogenics. It's about dealing with the cognitive behavioral side of it. You know, when I was in prison, I took that class, and it was one of those classes, by the way, that knocks off 30 days of your sentence. So you know I was taking that. But I didn't go into that class thinking that I was going to learn as much as I did. And so when I was in that class, I actually applied so much of what was working that it helped me stay out of trouble while I was in prison. And those same peer counselors is what they called them. Before there was a peer support specialist lingo used by Philip Cooper, it was called a peer counselor in the prison system. Some of y'all in here from North Carolina might remember when they utilized what they called peer counselors. It was one of the good jobs, y'all. One of the jobs you get $1 a day. It was like a promotion from the 70-cent a day jobs. You got a whole $1 a day when you was a peer counselor. But those same peer counselors that had an impact on me, I wanted to model what it was that they done to help other people. And that's what I ended up becoming while I was in prison, was a peer counselor. And I got to work with some of those guys that was coming to the prison. You know, they would go through the program. You know, it's sad, but many of them, their reading level was a little low, so I could help them with their homework assignments, you know, and they would just chop it up and talk about their life and the things they were going to living in that lifestyle. And I would share my experience. You know, when the heart speaks, the heart listens. And so I was able to have an impact. And that's when I found my calling, y'all. That's when I found my calling, and I've been a peer support ever since. So we talked a little bit about what a peer support is, peer workers. I like the way that SAMHSA breaks it down. And I really appreciate when they say mutual empowerment, because I'm gonna tell y'all something, and many of y'all know, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so there has to be mutual empowerment there. You have to walk your talk because people are watching. And that's something that I learned in the rooms of recovery. I'm not here to promote a specific pathway, but what I'll tell you is that there are models that was created before so many people cared about recovery that were working and helping people get their lives together. And I salute them, and I salute whoever else is coming up with models that are replicable that can help people. There are different pathways. But for peer support, and for what I'm talking about, I do want to make sure you understand that I have co-occurring disorders, right? I'm also a person who ran away from the mental health side of it, because in the Black community, we don't talk about that. Many of you may have heard from celebrities who talk about mental health, and we're trying to address the mental health stigma in the Black community. Maybe you heard a rapper named G Herbo. Maybe you seen Taraji P. Henson talking about it, or Charlamagne the God, who was a radio show for the Breakfast Club. But we're trying to address that mental health stigma. And so when we think about peer support specialists, not just because you don't have a diagnosis don't mean that you don't have a condition. Can I get a clap emoji? I was about to say an amen, but this ain't church. So when we talk about recovery and we talk about being a peer support, right? I have to remind people around my way, like, just because you're a certified peer support specialist doesn't mean that you're taking care of your recovery. And we have to remind people, your job is not your recovery, homie. You know, your recovery is a way of life, and it should involve some types of principles that lead to you living happy, joyous, and free. You know, and so with the peer support programs that I've been blessed to be able to lead, and I like to say blessed to be able to lead, because it was my recovery that qualified me for the jobs. And I need not forget that, because as soon as I forget that, it goes to the ego. And as soon as it goes to the ego, then I'm tripping. Somebody put tripping in the daggone chat. And so when we think about recovery being a requirement for the job, if recovery is a requirement for my job, then making recovery meetings is professional development. Let me say that one more time. If recovery is a requirement for the job, Recovery is a requirement for the credential. When you fill out that application, it asks you how much time you have in recovery. It asks you, what does recovery look like, right? So if that is a requirement for the job, then recovery meetings should be on the clock, because it's what? Professional development. Me and my team here in Asheville, North Carolina, I see my bro Jeremiah Lovelady in here somewhere. He got to come and spend a day with me, coming from Tennessee to Asheville. But like, we have recovery meetings that are walking distance from where our office is located. And many a times my staff and I will walk to a recovery meeting together, just catch up, talk about life or whatever. We peer supports. Iron sharpens iron. Look, I just started Operation Gateway. We got our 501c3 status in January of 2022. And one of the things that I knew I wanted to make sure we had, because, you know, when you have a smaller nonprofit, you don't have benefits and all of the other stuff, right? So one of the tactics that I want you to take away from here is make sure that your people have access to mental health services. Shout out to Mercy Urgent Care. Mercy Urgent Care has a setup for nonprofits to where you can get a certain amount of mental health visits, and you can go there and you can get your healthcare services. And one of the things that we run into, like I said, is with the smaller nonprofits. You might not have insurance. It might be a grant funded program that ends at a certain time. So one of the things I said was, we want to make sure that we have the therapy. We want to make sure that the people have access to therapy, you know, and it's on the clock. Like, your therapy session, when you go meet with your therapist, that is on the clock. If recovery is a requirement for the job, then guess what? Your therapy is professional development. Now, how many of y'all have lost friends who was in the field? How many of y'all know that people have died that were peer support specialists because they got to a point to where they stopped taking care of their recovery? I know a couple. I'm talking close friends, okay? I'm talking people who I knew from the recovery community who are no longer here on this planet. I'm talking ashes on my wall in a baggie to remind me. You see? We have to remember that we don't have all the answers, and we cannot pour from an empty cup. So therapy is on the clock. Therapy is on the clock, and therapy is different. Therapy is different from your accountability partners. Like, you got your accountability partners in whatever pathway of recovery you choose, but you also have a therapist who can go down those dark roads, because I don't know about y'all, but I done been some places in my life that got me still thinking, I don't know if I can trust this person that's in this office with me. So I need to make sure that I'm taking care of me, mind, body, and spirit. And also encouraging people to participate in coalitions, you see? So in Asheville, we have the Western North Carolina Community Health Worker Coalition. We have the Recovery Community Collaborative. We have different ways that you can serve on boards, because we have a lot of different nonprofits. And so I encourage people to serve on these coalitions so that they can continue to build their network. Because I don't know about y'all, but if you boots on the ground the way we be boots on the ground, you might run into one of your clients, peers, participants, whatever word you use, you might run into them in recovery meetings, and you might feel like you're not able to share what you need to share in that meeting. So the next thing you know, you done built you a little small group of people that like to go get pizza, that are all working closely with peers. And the next thing you know, you got an accountability partner group of people who are all professionals in the field. And who else better to help somebody that's working in the field than somebody that's working in the field with recovery? And so I encourage participation on coalitions and board service. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And I appreciate Dr. Swarbrick saying that about, a career advancement, because one of the things that I've been blessed to be able to do is have somebody start working with me as a certified peer support specialist. And the next thing you know, they working on an initiative for workforce development. You see, there are different ways that we can go, and we can take our peer support hat and be effective in places that don't have peer supports. That's my story. And self-care is always relevant. And so these things have to go down. These things have to go down on the clock. The recovery meetings are on the clock. The therapy is on the clock. Now, I also recommend to my team, like when they have people, now this is before a peer is used to utilizing the transit system, because we have a transit system. When they first come home, let's say somebody first come home from prison, They might ride with the peer to a couple of meetings before this peer gets to build their own social capital and have rides there. That meeting don't count. As a matter of fact, I require my team to make 2 meetings on the clock, and those are the meetings that they make without their peers. Because like I say, when some of these meetings at certain times of day, you might go to a meeting and it's a lot of like peers that you have worked with or cool with somebody that you know, and you got to be careful too to maintain ethical standards, you see, and that's important for you to understand, that you make meetings on the clock for yourself, but the other meetings that you're making with your peers are not the same ones. I hope that makes sense. If not, like I say, I'm available for follow-up, but I'm a heavy pusher of meetings. I don't care what meeting you go to. I'm not here to push a specific fellowship, but what I will tell you is there are existing models that have been around, and they're there for a reason, and they're still around for a reason. So let's help people understand how to navigate those. If recovery is a requirement for the job, then recovery meetings are professional development. I can't say that enough. I cannot say that enough. One of my friends from Jamaica, he says, no man is an island man. No man is an island. That means that you can't do this by yourself. And what I learned when I was in treatment was what? The opposite of addiction ain't recovery. The opposite of addiction is connection. And if I ain't got no connections, then how can I have recovery? Because recovery is all about being held accountable, learning how to live life on whose terms? Life's terms. And I don't know about y'all, but when I was out there ripping and running the streets, I was living life on my terms. I was breaking the law. Well, when I was in jail, I was on their terms, specifically during count time. Can anybody remember count time? I'm tripping. But like I say, I had to learn how to do life. I had to learn how to live life on life's terms. And I had to be taught that by other people who had done that. And where did I find those people at? I found those people in the recovery community. So there are different pathways, and I'm gonna be real with y'all, and I'm glad that they start this webinar off saying, everything that these people share are not necessarily, SAMHSA and the other people's things. So I'm giving y'all my experience, strength, and hope, right? So I'm not here to push a particular pathway, but I am here to list some of them that work, that have been around. So these are some of the 12-step pathways that a person can go into to build relationships. Like I said, no man, no woman is an island. You cannot do this by yourself, especially if you're a peer support specialist. How can you be a peer support specialist not working a recovery program? What do you have to model, homie? If you're not working a recovery program yourself, what can your peer learn from your modeling? And I'm the kind of guy, I know I can't do it by myself because I tried. Like, my track record shows that I can't do it alone. But these are some of the pathways. And discussing the pathways out loud with your peers, make sure you educate it, because that's what we do. Peer support specialists, resource navigators. How can you navigate resources? How can you educate people about resources if you don't even know about the resources yourself? And as far as culturally aligned supervision is the major key. I have worked as a case manager at the Neil Dobbins Center, which is a detox and crisis stabilization unit. I've worked alongside licensed clinical addiction specialists, licensed clinical social workers, psychiatrists, and like being on a team. It was a great experience to be there as a peer support. But I'm gonna tell you something. A peer support supervising another peer support hits way different. And culturally aligned holds weight. And when I say culture, don't get it twisted. I'm not saying only Black people can serve Black people or only white people can serve white people, because I know some people that's from the rural Western North Carolina who I can identify with way more than I can some Black folk that I know. Because I was born in Rutherford County, by the way, and I love my liver mush crispy. But let me tell you, culturally aligned supervision is very, very important. Because at the end of the day, many of us peer supports who built from a rock bottom, we've went through so much to where it's hard to trust somebody. And if you don't use that trauma-informed lens, you might judge somebody. So we got to be real careful with prioritizing this culturally aligned peer supervision, because we can't just automatically assume that just because another person is a certified peer support specialist, that they can understand all certified peer support specialists. No, it doesn't work that way. We all have different experiences. I see that in the chat. Culturally aligned, trauma informed. You got that right. And culturally sensitivity. Culture sensitivity is very important in this day and age because social media got everybody judging each other. But we need to remember what Maddie just said in the chat. The disease of addiction does not discriminate. Familiarize yourself with other pathways. As I said on the former slide, self-care is always relevant. You know, I love it when people get out of prison. One of the peer supports on the team, he loves to go to the gym. He likes to take people to the gym. That's another powerful place for people to connect and talk about life and welcome them home, especially from prison. When any of y'all, I don't know how many of y'all that are on here have worked with folks coming out of the penitentiary, but y'all know how it is when people done did 5-10 years, but they knew how to go in the gym and work out and you can communicate with them there. That's what it looks like. So being a peer support, we blessed because we get to do some of the activities that we would typically do for ourselves with our peers. That's the power of peer support. And when I think about self-care, it's always relevant because why? You can't pour from an empty cup. Team meetings. You see me and Lindsay right there. Lindsay is a certified community health worker, certified peer support specialist. Lindsay is kicking butt. She's a native of the area where she's serving in. So a lot of people she ain't got to say nothing when she walk in the room. When she walks in the room and people see her and they know her old life, they are inspired just from that. And so when we have our team meetings, they basically recovery meetings. We're reading out of a devotional. As you see in her hand, it's other people in the room, but I only put those two on there. But when you look at what we do as a team meeting, it's very similar to a recovery meeting because we read a devotion, have people share about it a little bit, and then we go into talking about, whatever the meeting is, whatever the agenda is. And at the end of the day, even with me being an executive director, I want my team to still see me as a person in recovery. I don't need you to look up to me. I mean, it's okay. I don't want to take away from it now. I am grateful for where God has brought me from now. But what I want y'all to understand is being a peer support, there are no big I's and little U's. We need to always have that open line of communication so that we have accountability. But I don't need you looking at me like I'm the king. Nah, I need you to look at me as brother that's finna empower you to go and help some people. Yeah, that part. And peer supervision is not your typical supervision. It's not the same. It's not the same. Many of y'all know, it's dependent upon who you work for. It's certain things you can say to your peer support specialist that you wouldn't dare say to a typical supervisor, right? So we need to understand that peer supervision is not typical. It's not the way it was when I worked for the community college. It's not the way it was when I worked for an advanced manufacturer. That relationship with the supervisor is very similar to one that you would have with a person on your support team, accountability partner. As a matter of fact, it should look identical to an accountability partner. So let's talk about a touchy topic real quick. So we're talking about when recovery is work. We talked about, being in recovery from addiction. We know it's a deadly disease, cunning, baffling, fatal, and will take us out. So when we start thinking about a credential that you're qualified for based off of your recovery, right? We have to be very, very careful. And watch this, we have to be very, very intentional. Over the years, what I learned was that you have to have a peer support policy in place. I've seen people get to the point to where they get that credential and they think that credential is their recovery and they get the big headed and then they mess around and have a return to use because couldn't nobody hold them accountable. What happens then, people? What happens when a peer returns to using? Do they keep their job? Is their credential still legit? People don't like to talk about that now, do they? That's why you better get a policy. And what I did was we hired an HR consultant and we sat down and we talked about policy. We sat down and we talked about policy and what the policy looks like if a person has to return to use. And it's a beautiful thing. I'll share more about that. You can reach out to me when you get my contact information at the end of this presentation, and we can talk about what the Operation Gateway policy looks like. But I'm gonna tell y'all something. Hold on, you be using and maintaining recovery. I don't know if that's a question, but we'll get to that when we get to the Q&A. What I will say is if you're practicing a program and you're practicing principles like integrity, authenticity, being genuine, and being a person, being a authentic peer support, then if a person has a return to use, that person should feel a certain type of way about what they just done. That's what I'm going to say. But I don't run everybody's recovery. Each person is up to them. But that's why it's important to have those team meetings the way that I say it, because when you have team meetings, it's a little bit harder to cross somebody that you know genuinely cares for you and is trying to see you win than it is for your typical supervisor. Also, when we talk about ethical dilemmas, the ethical dilemmas is in North Carolina, we refer to our it's called a springboard, and we have a code of ethics. People have to sign off on it. And so when there is an ethical dilemma, typically you defer to the organization that they're working for to determine what you do next. Whenever there's an ethical dilemma, you need to have policies, people. And I know many of us, we didn't do the popo. Ain't no popo, right? You know where we come from. But what I have to tell you, you might not do the popo, but you need to have a policy at your organization so that you don't do harm. Okay? Because for many of us, if you earned your seat in recovery the way that I did, the lack of action whenever something bad has happened is doing harm. It's doing harm, the lack of action. So you need to have a policy in place that's consistent across the board about what you should do whenever there is an ethical dilemma. Recovery principles are always relevant. You know, and yeah, I'm an old school guy. You know, I'm coming up on 15 years of sobriety. You know, January the 16th, 2009 is when my journey started. You know, I did get a jump start in the penitentiary. Like I told y'all, man, prison saved my life. But I'll tell you one thing, I learned a lot from my predecessors, but I've also opened my mind up more. You know, we have different pathways. We have, you know, medication assisted recovery and things like this, you know what I'm saying? And I get it. There's different pathways, but the principles don't change. The principles don't change, y'all. Honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, surrender, acceptance, forgiveness, service, perseverance, right? Accountability. The principles don't change. They don't change. So whatever your policy is, make sure you build those policies with your principles in mind. Now, when we start talking about all of this, you done heard me share all of this about policies and principles and recovery meetings and devotions and what happens if a person has a return to use. Ask yourself, is your organization recovery friendly? Does your organization really value lived experience? Because, you know, peer supports are starting to be embedded even within governmental organizations now. I mean, peer support is sexy now, y'all. You see it everywhere now. Everybody's talking about peer support. So when we look at it, does it make sense for the organization to house the peer supports if they can't hold them accountable in a certain type of way? What's your organization's background check policy? Because I don't know about y'all, but most peer supports I know got something on their background. Now, I know some of y'all on here may have slid through clean somehow, some way. Good. I don't want to say good job. No, you blessed, you lucky you. But what I will say is most peer supports that I know, they got a record. So what's your organization's background check policy? And then last but not least, and this is why I go so hard with holding peer supports accountable, because I don't like when they call us paraprofessionals. No. If you only knew what I went through to earn my degree from the School of Hard Knocks, if you only knew what I had to do to not return to my old way of life, then you wouldn't want to call me a paraprofessional whenever my recovery is what qualifies me for my job. We cannot go by paraprofessionals, y'all. I'm talking to my peer supports right now. We are not paraprofessionals, and this is why we got to hold each other accountable. This is why we got to abide by apprenticeship programs that have a catalog of additional trainings, professional developments, so we can empower our fellow peers, so we can hold them accountable to a higher standard. The same way they do with the National Association of Social Workers, or the same way that they do with the National Association of Community Health Workers. We have to have accountability within our field. We have to. So ask yourself that question. Is your organization recovery friendly? Does your organization value lived experience? Truly. What's your organization's background check policy? And are peers seen as paraprofessionals, or are you seen as the people with that, what we call lived expertise? If you got that lived expertise, I want you to hit a flex emoji. Y'all got the flex emoji? Oh, somebody already put the flex in the chat, Tanya Harris. And before I even got to ask, if you believe that, hit that flex emoji. And good job to you for making it to where you have made it in your recovery. Every last one of you. Because if you anything like me that gave up the high cost of low living, you'd be celebrated anytime peer support is the topic of conversation. Here's my contact information. If any of y'all are curious to know a little bit more about the Operation Gateway peer support policy that we hired an HR consultant to help us with, you can hit me up. Anything else you need, it ain't hard to find me. Just thank you so much for this opportunity, SAMHSA. This is something I don't take lightly. I've been counting down to it. Blessed to be here. And if you didn't hear me say God is good, you wasn't listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wow. So thank you so much to both of our speakers. Just amazing presentations today and so much information to take in. And thank you also to the audience for all of your really fantastic and supportive comments that just keep coming in. So I'd like to invite everyone to just take a moment and think of some questions that you might like to ask our speakers. This is a rare opportunity where we have them for another 20 minutes or so to address any specific questions you have. The best way to do that, just so it doesn't get lost in the chat, is to go down to the bottom of the page where there's the Q&A pod. And if you can use that, please, to type in your questions and we'll start queuing them up. And okay, and so mostly we're just seeing lots of thank yous and expressions of appreciation of both the presentations. Okay, so I'll just give folks a minute to collect their thoughts. Okay, and please use the Q&A if you can, just with so many comments coming into the chat. If you put your question in the chat, it sometimes gets lost in the feed. So a lot of people were asking throughout today's presentation about the slides and the recording. So everybody who is registered for this event will receive a copy of the slides by email. And we will also notify you when the recording is posted to the SAMHSA's YouTube channel. And that will all be happening in the coming weeks. So here's a question, and I suppose let's start with Philip, but this is really for both of the presenters. If you'd like to comment on this, can you send me or maybe point me to examples of policies that you have in place in regards to peer workers? So I'll just open that up and just say, are there any resources that you can point folks to that are examples of policies for peer workers?
Yeah, so first and foremost, the question you have to ask yourself is, do you work for a peer-led organization? Because depending upon if your organization is peer-led or not, that will determine how detailed you can get with your policy. Because like if it's not a peer-led organization, they're not going to feel comfortable asking certain type of questions or having certain types of movements because of, lawsuits or whatever else, because, it gets touchy when you start talking about mental health. I can give you some examples of things that's off our policy, in which one of them I talked about during the webinar, in which people make 2 meetings on the clock. And another one about, whenever there is a return to use, if a person returns to use, then they're no longer qualified to do the job. And so one of the things we came up with is that a person gets paid 30 days, and that's enough time for them to be able to, work on finding a different job. We don't just fire them and let them go, but they know what time it is coming in to where they sign off on that. And I'm not going to sit here and act like this has been happening for many years. This is something, like I told y'all, that I just came up with. And when Operation Gateway got its 501c3 status, and based off of my experience working as a peer support within the government, within the criminal legal system, within academia, I seen where I wanted to have certain things in a policy or certain things be addressed, but it wasn't until it was a peer-led organization, Operation Gateway, to where I was able to make that decision. So if your organization is peer-led, it can be more detailed and more to the point, right? Versus if you work for a governmental organization or some company that doesn't want to be too touchy with the peer support policy. Meetings on the clock, as well as that piece about what happens when a person has a return to use, or some examples of what comes from our policy.
And I can, so I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I've worked with a peer-led organization for 25 years. I've been involved in the agency. So I have a lot of experience with this, but we use not, I mean, it's somewhat, so we're, the way we approach policy is from a universal design approach. So we try to not segregate policies for people. We try to create more equity in terms of the policies for all staff, because more than likely, you know, you want to try to be equitable and not segregating people in a sense of a way. So we might have like higher utilization of people who use the insurance or who are out. One of the things we did from a practice perspective early on is we have a very liberal time off, you know, schedule. I mean, from the beginning, like time off benefit, you know, for people. So that was one of the things earlier on that like it was sort of policy, sort of practice to help people. But we don't use, you know, when we don't, for our experiences, we've never let anybody go because of using or any, you know, mental health relapse or whatever. We would work on in the policy is coming up with policies and procedures around helping people, you know, be, you know, moved to a different job or outside of the organization related to performance that would be the performance, you know, process you would go with any employee, any employee. So we don't have a targeted, you know, you're in check for people. Like you're not going to do that in our agency or something like that. But if someone's performance related to some kind of relapse, but we use a little bit of a different approach. We don't let them go. It's performance and then over a process, because we believe people can have a second chance and want to try to help, you know, work with someone to get them back on their road to recovery. And then we have a whole host of other policies if anybody want to reach out, because like I said, it's been quite a long time. We have over 200 plus staff. So there's a lot of experience with policies if anyone wants to reach out.
Yeah, and I want to add something to that too, especially with what Doc just shared, just to be clear. Now, I'm about second chances, right? I'm not saying I'm not about second chances, but I'm about accountability. And so in North Carolina, to become a certified peer support specialist, you have to have a certain amount. It's a time, right? There's a time that you have to have with recovery, right? Even to take the training, you have to have it. To be certified, you have to have at least a year. So if you return to use, that's technically a restart. Like when we look at recovery, you know, with the lens that we use, you know what I'm saying, with integrity, right? Authentic peer support. If we're meeting on the regular and a person has a return to use, then it's up to them to be honest about it. But when you active in the recovery community, it ain't for so long you can hide it. You know, there have been some folks that could try to hide and fly under the radar, but you know, for us, we want to have that open line of communication for people to understand, like if you do have a return to use, we still help you. We ain't cutting you off and throwing you by the wayside. But what we telling you is if you had a return to use, then there's some other things you need to be working on before you trying to have your program of recovery be the model for somebody that's coming out of a dark space.
Thank you. So there's a question here about hiring peers. So the question is about job interviews, what to ask, what not to ask. Maybe just more broadly, where can people find resources for guidance around, you know, recruiting and interviewing peers at an organization?
Well, like I said, we just use whatever practices you would use in any human resources. And then if that's the lived experience credential, you know, it's just coming up with a protocol around the qualifications of the job. I think any job, any job competence, any job, performance evaluation or recruitment or retention shows go from what the job description is. So being able to kind of interview related to the job description and make sure people are clear about what the job is, and then creating protocols around how you would ask people for that job, particularly that, and it has that they need to have some type of a lived experience as a credential or, competency, just just asking some open-ended questions about that. That's sort of how we have approached it and how we do approach it. And yeah, and you have to be, those are the kind of things we've done.
Yeah, and I'll say from the apprenticeship lens, like I told y'all, I worked at the community college. I've worked in the behavioral health space, and it was kind of like something behind the scenes was strategically designing this, right? And so what I learned was like to create an apprenticeship. We have a registered apprenticeship with the United States Department of Labor, and so we have a catalog of trainings for people to be able to take. So like when you become a peer support, that training is great, but that ain't the end, right? So we got motivational interviewing. We got mental health first aid. We have wellness recovery action plan. We have youth mental health first aid. We have suicide intervention. We have something called QPR, which is question, persuade, refer. It is about addressing, suicide intervention as well. We have community health worker training, and then we have the forensic peer support training. So we make sure our team is on the clock whenever they're doing these trainings. And the way that we did that and had that saluted by the rest of the organization, because like you say, it's dependent upon if you have a peer-led organization or not, how much time you can spend in the classroom. So what we ended up doing was creating this with the Department of Labor, and the Department of Labor requires 190 classroom hours, right? Beautiful. And there's our catalog of trainings. There's your catalog of trainings that you can use for your peer workers as they go into the field so that they can be readily available. Computer skills in the workplace. That's another thing. I found that there are some of the old school recovery folks are so great at connecting with people and supporting people, but there's maybe a skills gap as it relates to Microsoft Outlook or Microsoft Teams. And so we want to get those people ready for technology. And we don't have to send them to go get a degree in cybersecurity, but you can make sure that they understand how to navigate the spreadsheet. You don't have to know how to do all the formulas and stuff, but you got to know how to navigate the spreadsheet. There's a keyboarding class that you can take to get up your typing speed. But I tell people all the time, like if they're like, man, how do you be typing and you're not even looking at the keyboard? I'm like, listen, do not compare yourself to me, bruh. Listen, this is not it, and I let people know, like, this is what happened when I was in college and all this other stuff. Quit comparing yourself, bro. The same way I talk to anybody that's in recovery. That's the power of peer support, y'all. You just remember to be the great person you are whenever you're in the recovery community. We just blessed to get to be that person on the clock. And we're blessed to be able to share our recovery journey. Because when I was working in the counseling field, one of the things they said, that was on that non-disclosure. Don't tell them nothing. They better not say nothing. But as a peer support, I'm blessed, super blessed to be able to share my recovery journey with you. And there are a significant amount of trainings that a person can take. Trauma-informed resources for resiliency, definitely having people understanding that trauma-informed lens in this day and age, Narcan training, harm reduction training. I mean, there are so many trainings, but as you build and get your apprenticeships registered with the Department of Labor, be sure to include those on it's called a work process schedule.
Thank you. So we were given a lot of tools today to support fostering a culture of wellness at organizations, and also for individuals to access tools to practice their own self-care and wellness. And someone here is asking, if you notice the signs of burnout in a coworker or someone that you're supervising, how do you address it with the person? Would either of you care to make some comments on that question?
Yeah, I mean, normally what you could do is just kind of approach people and use sort of open-ended questions to see where they're not to target them so they don't get, could further stress them out, but just kind of be, depending on your relationship with them, it's just kind of checking in with people, how's it going, and sort of having a conversation with them. I actually, interesting enough, I just recently, the last 3 years, I've actually developed a peer support. It's an informal peer support program we use at the medical center where we train. Now we're training all healthcare providers to be informal peer supporters to do just what you just asked. And we have a method for it. It uses a subset of peer support listening skills and connection skills. And then if the person seems to be at a point where they need to be, connected to some other resource. But I can share a little bit about that. It's actually on the website, the one website, that program is listed there. That's a nice way, and people have found it very helpful to have that just listening peer there for you, no judgment, just be there to support, provide empathy. So that would be what I suggest, or, if you want to develop even a more formal program, we really need to provide peer support for all healthcare providers, I think.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
what I'll share is like just those check-ins, like authentic peer support. My team and I, we move like a unit. We move like I say, we blessed to get to do this work. We know each other. We know each other's families. A lot of us knew each other from the recovery community before this grant came in, right? So we keep that same energy. These principles are just as valid today as they were when they was formulated. Accountability is major. And when I spend time with people, I can tell when they off. They can tell when I'm off. Like I say, I'm the executive director, but I'm also a Black man in recovery that's leading in Western North Carolina, which can be very racist. So like, there are times whenever I have a hard meeting that I done left and just came back from a meeting with some stakeholders, and I get back to the office and they in the office and they like, hey, when you look off, you sure you okay? You want to talk? You want to take a walk? Or here lately, we've been bike riding. Some of y'all may have seen that on my LinkedIn, but they done got a brother to get a bike. And one of them just popped his head in the office. But like, that's what it's about, like authentic peer support. So burnout is a real thing. And we need to definitely be able to know our comrades enough to tell when they're off and address it, hold them accountable, and make sure, like I said early in the presentation, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
And yeah, just like I did at the beginning, what we did at the beginning, every once in a while, share with each other your cool ideas, like have a little conversation about that, do one of the little tests in one of your meetings, just so people are sharing and reinforcing the self-care that they're doing to be preventative. And like I said, myself, I've had some really some significant challenges a couple of years ago. And it was like all of these sessions I do with people where I started saying, so-and-so was saying this thing and that thing. And I needed to come up with a few new tools. And I was able to try some things people were talking about when, we were doing some brainstorms. So you just never know how you sharing of others or sharing amongst each other can help, activate someone else's self-care and, saves lives and saves people keeping that passion for their work.
Thank you. So someone here is asking about what are tips for recognizing and avoiding peer drift? So peers shifting into another role.
Yeah, that's the slippery slope we're on right now. There's a lot of it going on. So that's a concern of mine. I've seen some major drift and major go into the wrong ports and stuff, but I think being mindful of it and setting it up, and then really when you hire people, supervising them well and working from clear shared focus on, and really be able to use fidelity tools. There are fidelity tools out there, whatever kind of peer support you're doing. Use some of those tools and have conversations with each other, because I'm seeing some major drift. And so thank you for that question.
Yeah, and what I'd say, so I haven't talked a lot about peer support drift myself. So I would appreciate it if just for myself as well as others on the Zoom who may not know what peer drift is, could someone give a good definition of peer drift?
So you get trained. Peer support have competencies, peer support have specific roles and delineation. And so now we've got so many people out there in these roles, and you start to see them not doing those things that they've been trained to do, and also doing things that perhaps don't align with the peer support competencies. I mean, one of the examples you gave about some of the I worry about some of even the trainings that people are going to that are not, some of the trainings that are being encouraged for peer supporters are causing a lot of that drift because we're not keeping to the core of the peer support competencies. Go look at SAMHSA's competencies, and then perhaps each of the training programs in the state have certain trainings around it. I would take a close look at some of those trainings. That would be one thing. But then in practice, I would come up with a way of really being able to make sure everybody knows what we do as a peer and what we don't do as peers, because you see a lot of people doing a lot of case management, doing other kinds of things that's perhaps outside the scope of the practice. So that you're drifting away from what you're supposed to be doing, basically, from the competency or the practice.
So thank you for breaking that down. And now I'll share here the same thing that I shared when I met a guy from Pennsylvania who done the forensic training. The same way I've had this conversation with some of my comrades in New Mexico, with my work with the National Association of Community Health Workers. I wish we just had one body that governs peer support. I mean, it's separated state to state to state to state, and everybody does it differently. And going back to what Dr. Swarbrick said, you know, it could be the trainings that have people drifting. I mean, who knows? But like with us having so many, you know, we have 50 states in the United States of America. And I mean, I'm wondering how many different bodies do we have of peer support? What if there was one governing body for peer support and we could double down on the competencies? That would be amazing.
It wouldn't,
amazing.
It wouldn't solve the problem. It happens on the street. It happens out in the street. So it will still happen with one body. You have to, I think part of it is, it's us, it's people, it's a little bit more, and I think it's moving in a positive direction, more, you know, getting involved in your national associations and then doing more learning, you know, doing more peer-to-peer support and peer-to-peer. You talk about accountability. It's trying to find ways to do accountability around peer support, fidelity, you know, using fidelity tools that are out there. There are what they call faith, that's the faithfulness to the model. So you find that tool, and maybe that's a way to start in some places. But great question.
Okay, so we just have, I think, time to squeeze in one last question, and so I'll give an opportunity to both of our speakers to respond if they wish. So this is about looking forward from a system. I'm just going to read the question. So from a systems change perspective, peer support is a true innovation. I'm not reading the whole thing. What are next steps after collaborative engagement training to continue the new learning from a personal leadership perspective?
Yeah, I'm looking to see the questions in the chat. There.
It's in the Q&A.
Oh, it is. Okay. Okay.
Allie Middleton.
Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think just continuing to I think it's it's going to continue to evolve too, right? It will also continue, you know, the model will evolve perhaps. And also, I think it will also, there is going to need to be some focus on the leadership development. I think that's been a little bit lacking in the whole space of it. So, you know, so I think some of what we're talking about today can really be things to think about, but I think finding ways to do personal leadership development for peer supporters to create that, as I said before, there's not a career pathway sometimes. So maybe that's also another place where we need to look at a focus on that career pathways for people as well. That's just one thought that comes to mind.
Yeah, I would say, man, I'm fired up. This you know, I love that one governing body in solidarity, peer supports from across the whole country in solidarity, one training, different personalities that can train it, same code of ethics in solidarity, same list and catalogs of trainers that we come up with to address the skills gap, and apprenticeship that is replicable. I would definitely say, you know, it's being, you know, pushing towards solidarity as much as we can. because the more you have, it apart, you can get to the point where you got too many egos, you see. And for a person in recovery like myself, man, I gotta keep my ego in check. And so when we see that solidarity, I feel like that can really help us the most. And then the other part of the question, you said, let me look back at it one more time. The other part from a systems change perspective, peer support is a true innovation. I feel like we got to be careful with how much we innovate peer support, because peer support really is straight to it. The more that we, change what the definition of recovery is, the more that we change the definition of what peer support is, the next thing it's hard to hold each other accountable because it's so wide range and it starts to become vague. And so in my experience, I have to even be intentional about letting people know what my pathway of recovery is so that I don't get it twisted, because they're around my way, you can become a peer support and say you're in mental health recovery and then you don't have to have a sobriety date or something to go by. And then if you are a person that's in recovery from addiction and you going by that date to determine when you can take the training, that's two completely different ball games. And for another thing that I've seen that we have to be careful with is I've seen people have a return to use and then keep their job and say they in mental health recovery, So I feel like we got to be careful with how much we innovate on peer support and stick to the basics and as much solidarity as possible across the United States of America, because the disease of addiction, especially the opioids, is hurting communities all across the United States of America. And we need to be in solidarity as we try to kick its butt, as well as it kicking the stigma's butt.
Yeah, someone mentioned the SAMHSA national guidelines have been released. So that would be some things. I think that's a step in the right direction in some ways for the for the drift question, I think, as well as some of the future, a little bit of the future. I think that's going to help, I think, be a big help. That was just released about 2 weeks ago.
Thank you. All right, and with that, we are out of time, folks. So once again, I'd like to thank Mr. Philip Cooper and Dr. Peggy Swarbrick for their really awesome presentations today. I have just a couple of things to wrap up, so I'm going to move through these last slides quickly. A lot of people were asking in the chat, how do we get in touch with the speakers? When you receive the slides via email, their contact information is provided there if you'd like to reach out to them. There's a closing poll now that you'll see pop up on your screen. If you'd like to give us feedback, this information is collected and we share it with SAMHSA. So any information about additional input or technical assistance or other topical areas that you would like information, you can go ahead and indicate that there. And next slide, please. A certificate of attendance is going to be placed in the chat and you can download it from there. We'll place it in the chat a couple more times before we sign off today, just to make sure folks have a chance to download it. And in addition, there's another resource that we'll also be putting in the chat. When you receive the slides, all of the resources that Dr. Swarbrick had mentioned that we linked in the chat, those resources are linked in the slides as well. And here's an additional resource that you can also download today. And finally, if you haven't signed up already for the GAINS listserv, here is the link to do that. This is, you can use the QR code today on the screen or click the link when you receive the slides. This is where you can sign up to receive our newsletter and announcements of upcoming webinars, trainings, and other opportunities. And finally, this is the information that you can contact us here at the GAINS Center. So if you need to reach us, would like to give us a call, you can reach us here at the contact information provided. And thank you to everyone for your participation today. And we look forward to seeing you at the next event.